Andy Tager's an amazing individual, and I'm very glad he's had that conversation with us. I wish he'd just told me about that before I'm about to get up and say we're all tougher than we think we are. Not the follow-up message I would have been aiming for, to be honest. Whoopsies. Sorry about that. So my name is Liz Crowe. I'm a senior social worker just down the road here at Lady Cilento Children's Hospital, and I work in paediatric intensive care. And so every 4 days in some shape or form, I'm involved in a child's death. And I guess the reason that I felt really compelled to have this conversation with you all today is that I think we are monumentally destroying children's natural resilience. And I don't mean that children don't feel anything, and I don't mean that children don't suffer. I'm just saying that one of the key points that I keep banging on about, because I'm doing a PhD in staff wellbeing, is that I think one of the primary problems for medical staff in particular is you genuinely have never failed. Whereas if you're a social worker like me, you've failed your whole friggin' life. Like, every other day I could tell you something stupid that I have done. And this is a new thing for you. And so I think, when we were coming, through our lives, those of us who are less talented than you guys were, your parents let you suffer and fall and find your way, and we don't do that anymore. So I always think if you want to know what's going on now, look to the past. And this is actually the most blessed, planned, conceptualized, group of children that the world has ever seen. And today I'm really talking about the Western world. We still have a lot of children in developing countries in particular who live in horrendous conditions, and even Indigenous children in Australia and other Western countries. I'm not talking about them because that's a whole separate other talk. But when my parents, who are Catholic, I don't know if any of you are Catholic, but, they use the rhythm method, like however many kids you ended up, that's what you do. We've advanced a little bit beyond that now. And so this generation is so cherished. And their parents do everything humanly possible to keep them safe, protected, tell them how important, special, amazing that they are. So you would assume that being raised in an environment like that would mean that we have the healthiest, most robust, happiest generation of children ever. And that's not the case. So just like Andy was talking about, we now know that 1 in 4 Australian children will have a serious mental health problem in their time. A few days ago, a report came out that said 17% of 14 to 17-year-old children in Australia have attempted suicide in the last 12 months. And when you talk to children, they have this whole language. So for those of you who aren't Australian children have been standardised testing for about a decade now, and it's called the NAPLAN. And my 5-year-old, several years ago, came home and said, "Just to let you know, Mum, I've got anxiety." And I said, "Really? Blessed child, what do you have anxiety about?" And he said, "My NAPLAN is coming up and the teacher has told me we may need some help with our anxiety." And I said, "Well, I don't think you need to get anxious about your NAPLAN because it's not going to mean jack squat to you in the future." But the night before NAPLAN, he had been built up from school and his peers and the community to believe that he was anxious. He came out and said, "I can't sleep because of my anxiety." And being like every glorious mother, I said, "Don't be ridiculous." And then when he still couldn't sleep, I told him I was going to give him some homeopathy, which I actually didn't have. So I mixed up some water and said, "This is going to knock you out and you probably are not going to be able to even walk back into your room." And I put 2 drops of water in his glass of water. And because his DNA may be somewhat similar to mine, he walked like this to the bedroom and slept soundly. But When we start telling children from such an early age, you cannot cope, guess what? They won't. When we say, you don't have the skills, you don't have the resources, you're not going to know what to do, they won't. And so I think we really need to think carefully about how we're raising this generation of children, including how we're treating them in hospitals. So again, let's look backwards. Until the mid-19th century, childhood was hell. Like genuinely hell. Apart from the Stone Age, where I read this morning at 4 a.m, they were pretty happy and perhaps had a healthier lifestyle than we do. But, they lived in a community, they were, only eating what they grew. Sure, they were dead at 26, but they were happy in childhood. But for the most part, prior to the mid-19th century, children were slave labour. This is a real depiction of how children as young as 4 were forced to work in the mines because that's how big the tunnels were. So that if you were poor, you sent your children out to work. They didn't go to school. My mother is Maltese. My grandfather came out on a boat from Malta, aged 11, not being able to speak English and $7 in his pocket. He went on to be a semi-wealthy cane farmer who had 7 children, still able to thrive. And yet now we tell kids over and over and over again, you can't do it. And I don't agree. Children are born resilient. So we've got a couple of little neonates in the audience today, which is just lovely. But when they want something, they know to cry, to squirm, to catch our attention, right from birth. They know how to engage us. And do you think how much children have to learn even in the first 12 months? And they often fail, but they keep persisting. So resilience in the early ages, as long as they're in a loving and nurturing environment, actually is their default. But what happens, just like no child is born racist, no child is born with prejudice, we teach them stuff. And sometimes adults just need to get out of the way and let kids sort it out themselves. When I went to primary school, and I hate to be one of those mothers who are like, when my day, we were taught by the No Mercy nuns. The no is my add-in. They actually are the mercy nuns. But, they had their own story. At age 13, often Irish families donated a child to the convent and to the priesthood. I'm not joking. They were sent out here on a boat away from their families and forced to teach. Probably little smart-ass Australian children like me. But, in our day, if the nuns smacked you with a ruler or a cane or punched you and you went home, your parents belted you as well because, that... And I'm not saying I was physically abused. That's a completely different thing. But we knew what the rules were and I worked hard to get my parents' respect. Whereas now, parents work very hard to please their children. The reverse is happening and kids are confused by that. Very confused. And I see it all the time where parents are like, because parenting is bloody exhausting for those of you who've never done it. And children learn very quickly that if it's worth asking 1,422 times because they'll give it in, then it's worth doing. Can I have it? No. Can I have it? No. Can I have it? They've got a counter. 1,422 times later, you're like, oh, for God's sake, just have it. So children actually need boundaries. It's what keeps them safe. Now, what amazes me is that we say, children can't possibly cope with conflict and they can't cope if their teacher's not, talented and beautiful and nice to them at all times. But then adults make decisions about children right from a very early age that we just think is okay. So lots of babies love sucking their fingers or their thumbs or a pacifier or a dummy, don't they? And then one day the parents, that's the thing they love most in the world. One day their parents go, actually, you can't have that anymore. And they do even more wonderful things like say, Santa's going to take your dummy tonight. So Merry Christmas. The thing you love most in the world. So loss and grief actually starts for children quite young. If you have ever dropped your child at daycare like this, where you're prizing every finger, they're like attached like a koala, that's all okay. But then we decide other areas of loss and grief, they can't possibly cope. And Mandy Tanner came up with this great analogy, and I thank her for that, and I use it all the time, is that really, if you want to understand how much children cope with loss and grief all of the time, watch any movie or read any children's literature, okay? We don't think anything of it. Nemo, opening scenes. His mother and 63 siblings are eaten by a barracuda. He's born with a disability. He disobeys. He's kidnapped. He's lost. He's in a tank with a group of weirdos. We don't think anything of it. The Lion Who Wanted to Love, a lovely book that I still know off by heart to these days, is about a lion who refuses to kill because he's a vegetarian. And so his family and the whole pride cut him off, goes to live on his own. We don't say, you can't read this, children, it might damage you. So we still have got this whole, you can cope with this, but you can't cope with this scenario. Harry Potter. Orphaned, aged 12 months, disfigured, no plastic surgery, wears glasses, taped up, lives with bullies. You know, again, we don't say, you can't read Harry Potter. It's sad. And yet, grandma gets cancer and everyone's like, don't tell the children. And do you know, in my career, I cannot tell you how many children have said to me, I'm dying, and do you think my parents know? Yeah, they're not idiots. And for anyone who's ever had a child, you can stand right beside them and say, dinner time, please come to the dinner table. Your dinner is on the table. Your dinner is going cold. I'm going to kill you if you don't come to the dinner table. They do not move. But if you kick your toe 150 kilometres away and go, they're like, ooh, you're hurting baby Jesus. So they have very selective hearing and they are very able to cope with things, and we underestimate that. Now, in the Batman Lego movie, there's a scene where they're like, everything is awesome, you know, and we tell children that all the time, you're so gifted. And I'm not very popular at school because very early in the whole stage that everybody was sitting around saying how gifted their child was. My child is so gifted. My child is extraordinary. My child is this. And I was like, yada, yada. So I said, you do realise if everybody is gifted, it means all our children are average. And I've never been invited to a morning tea since. But everything is not always awesome. That is not what life is. You know, if all we can really hope for is good problems in our lives, not no problems, that's unrealistic. If you ever love another individual, you will suffer. They will not live forever. They will not love you forever. They will not put out forever, all right? That's the realities. So if you tell children everything is awesome and everything is going to be fine, when they get soccer punched in the face by life, they are genuinely shocked. And I am not making light of what Andy said, but a big part of that is along the way, not acquiring those skills so that when failure comes, you go, okay, I've had this before and I know what it feels like. Not that it's okay, not that it's minimised, not that you don't have to seek out help and assistance, just I've done this before. And I've survived. And if you look at the history of happiness, again, prior to really the 19th century, people didn't expect to be happy. Do you know what I mean? Like, my grandparents were married for 62 years, and someone said to me, that is so lovely. And I'm like, they hate each other. You know, what was the secret to it? They just didn't leave. So prior to the 19th century, people didn't expect to be happy. And in actual fact, if you were from a strong, fundamental Christian background, which lots of people were prior to the 19th century, you weren't expecting to be happy until you got to heaven. Everything was an endurance to get to heaven. Let's hope they got what they wanted. All right, so what is the purpose of childhood? It's not for accolades. It's not to achieve. It's not to make your parents look good. It's to get skills to go forward in life. And that is not to get the skills to be an amazing academic and go on and do amazing things. Because what we know about happiness is, while if you love work and enjoy it, it's not one of the primary things. The 3 core primary things for happiness is quality of relationships, random acts of kindness, and being grateful. Are we teaching these qualities to children? No. You know, Mark mentioned in the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Beep, because I don't swear on stage, is our crisis is no longer hunger or material, it is existential. We have so much stuff, so much opportunity, we don't know what to care about anymore. And we need to teach children how to focus and prioritise about the things that matter, and to teach them that it's okay to be inadequate. It doesn't mean it's all right to stay like that, but there will be lots of things you won't excel at. Ross spoke about that this morning. And our brains learn from experience from the past. And if we wrap them in bubble wrap, they won't have those experiences. Not getting invited to the party. You know, like once upon a time in past, the parcel came around a newspaper. And you were just either friggin' lucky or you weren't. Now, every child, you know, they'll give you a list. Pause it here on this child so that every child wins. In life, everybody doesn't win. Even really famous families like the Kennedys are not always blessed. And, you know, this is the Story Bridge. It's in Brisbane. It could be any bridge. But when you build a bridge, you want really good, solid foundations. And then you scaffold and build on top of that. No one builds a bridge that they want to be strong and hardy and durable and resilient by going, "You're the greatest. You're so awesome." Because people would just drive straight into the water. And children are no different. So here are the 7 characteristics, they say, that we need to teach children. Curiosity. And if you're going to ask a child to be curious, they have to fail and do stupid things. Not dangerous things. They will do dangerous things, but stupid things. I was going to say a really inappropriate story. Okay. Gratitude, zest, optimism, self-control, grit, and social intelligence. And I'm going to add a few just because I can. We have to teach them to cope with adversity and disappointment. Because life is full of adversity and disappointment. We have to teach self-efficacy. Now, this is my son, the same 5-year-old anxious boy, going to kindy dressed as Steve Irwin. And he came out and I said, "What are you dressed as?" And he went, "Steve Irwin." And I said, "I'm not sure about the pimp hat." I didn't say pimp hat because he doesn't know what a pimp is, but I said, "I'm not sure the hat fits the outfit, nor am I sure about the bright red wiggle socks." But he believed himself to be Steve Irwin. He was so confident that for me, all I would have done was undermine him. So I said, "You know what? You're right. You look exactly like Steve Irwin." I thought, I'm taking a photo of this and I'm using it in conferences for the rest of his life. But if you get up every day with a belief that you can survive, that even when things are really hard, and there have been days that my job has literally had me on my knees. There has been days when my job has been so revolting, I have dry reached in the toilet. But I have a deep belief that I will claw my way back. And so far, I have been able to. We have to teach them to build a tribe. Connection is everything. Someone who has your back. And if you don't have someone like that in your own life, search them out like a man with his head on fire looks for water. Isn't that a great saying? But find your tribe and find them early. Teach them to have a sense of fun and a sense of humour. So these have been my children starring all the way through this, just because you don't have to pay when they're your own children. But embarrassingly, so my kids have not had an easy life. I divorced their father early. The one with the very weird hat on has anaphylaxis to dairy, egg and nuts. You know, like things have gone wrong. Their beloved uncle has a non-curable cancer. But when they talk about horrible things that happened in their life, this hat comes up. Because I had done 2 all-nighters trying to get an assignment in, and when I went to pick him up from kindy, the kindy teacher said, "Don't forget the Easter bonnet parade tomorrow." And I was like, "What Easter bonnet parade? That wasn't in the newsletter." She said, "Don't worry, working mother, put a balloon on a cap." And I said, "I'm going to sew something." Yeah, I look back on that with horror, but when they talk about things that have damaged them, that hat comes up. We teach these characteristics by letting them fall. By letting them fall. By letting them understand that you can survive things. By showing them our own vulnerability. I am often a terrible parent, and when I am, I come and say, "I'm sorry, I'm tired, or I'm stressed, or that was stupid, or that was about me." But when they're horrible, I tell them that as well. But I don't ever say, "I don't love you." I'm very clear about that. So one of the things, I know we're out of time, aren't we? Yeah, everyone's... So growth mindset is one of the things out of Stanford University that they're talking about, that one of the things that they're doing, even with really disadvantaged children, is talking to them about neuroscience, and that how you do at school can change, and how you do at life can change, that your DNA is important, but it's not everything. And that all of us can push beyond what we think we can with grit, perseverance, passion, and determination. And so one of the greatest chess schools in the whole of America for producing children is one of the poorest, because their teacher believes they can learn. Chores, funnily enough, is the other thing. Chores and how early you have a paid job. So chores, paid job, and love. They're things that we can give our kids really easily. Now, these are my boys now. They have grown up, and despite having an idiot mother, they seem to be thriving. And the thing is that it's very important to children to know that they are loved and they are part of my world. But I am very clear to them that they are not loved by the whole world. That responsibility for their lives lies heavily with them and with me. And every night when they go to bed, I tell them, there is nothing that will happen in your life that we won't be able to do together. Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks so much, Liz. Apart from a homeopathic hack, I'm wondering, how do you teach kids to be grateful? What's this thing about gratitude? Like, how do you reckon we teach them gratitude?
Do you know the first thing? Don't give them everything. The more kids get, the more they want. I see families save and go into debt to take their kids who are like 6, 8 and 10 to Disney World, and they are surprised that on the plane home they're whinging. All right? Well, I went to Disney World in my 20s, and my brother and I couldn't stop laughing how many people were belting their kids saying, "You enjoy yourself because we..." You know, you can't expect a child of 6 to line up for 45 minutes for a ride and not whinge. So, number one, don't give them everything, because then they are grateful when they get something. So the other thing is just to remind them. So, you know, my kids are totally in therapy probably, soon. But when someone comes over to our house, they'll often say, "Is this someone just visiting or someone with a problem?" So my kids are very used to hearing people cry. They know that there are very sick children. I share my working life and my life with them. And I think teaching them to be grateful. I did go through an exercise where we were doing a gratitude journal, because it says it's one of the ways. My kids were very grateful when I stopped doing that at the dinner table.
It's great.
But I think the number one thing is just don't give the little buggers everything, because, then and give them pocket money, make them save. So one thing that my parents did to us that I do to my kids is they have to buy birthday presents, Mother's Day presents for everybody out of their own pocket money. And I don't care how crappy it is, they have to save and do that from the time, they were really little, because it gives them the value of money and it makes them understand how to work things out.
Totally agree with you, Liz. Look, my child saved so well that I borrowed money off of him. But anyway, Aidan, what's happening on Twitter?
So I think we'll just go for 2 very quick questions. The first one's from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine Learning account, and it was, what's one reason you think we're not honest with kids, and what can we do, kind of briefly, to encourage parents to allow their kids to be exposed to the ugly side of the world?
They're brief questions.
Yeah, you know.
I think you meant brief answers.
To be honest with you, it's adults' fears. Okay, so children don't fear death and they don't fear illness the way that we do. Particularly children under 8. If you say your grandmother is going to die, it's no different than saying your grandmother's off to Paris. You know, what the hell does that mean? You know, and so we use all this confusing language because it's adults' anxiety. Usually give kids all the facts and they either get distressed or they don't get distressed. They can distract themselves. Grief is very developmental for children. And the more you talk about, like if you tell a 3-year-old their father's dead, they'll walk into kindy and they'll be like, our father's dead, died on a motorbike accident. Like they're just reporting. You know what I mean? Their grief actually will come much later in life. So it's our fear. We are so terrified. And then what we do is we build it up. Oh, I've got to tell the kids I'm separating from their father. And then we do it while they're trying to watch TV or they're hungry or, you know, you've got to pick your moments based on them. But we need to get over it. Kids are much more able to have these conversations than we are. And then they'll ask very tricky questions. So do you eat when you're dead? Do you have a birthday party when you're dead? You know, like an adult's like, oh my God. They're just exploring it. That's all it is. And the other thing is that how do we encourage parents? I guess, you know, every time a parent comes into the intensive care unit, their first thing is, we're not going to let the siblings come in. We're not going to do it. We're going to protect them. And, you know, that's just fear and it's love. So we're very respectful of that. But I will often sit down with them and say, you know, this sibling's going to die and they're not going to come home. So how are we going to be able to keep this facade going? And in my experience, this is what's happened. And we're going to talk this through with you. And people come around very quickly. But we always have to realise that even if it's poor parenting, most parents have their children and their heart's best wishes. They just don't always have the skills and resources to carry it out.
Cool. And a quick question, Casey from Broomdocs. Do you think medical training is kind of an extended childhood in some ways, in that it doesn't prepare us for the reality of practice in real life?
Do you know, I do think that, 100%. Yeah. I genuinely think you guys have excelled your whole lives. The rest of us haven't. And so, you know, like, I'm not kidding that, you know, there were so many things in life prior to getting to university where I hadn't come first and I hadn't done best. So when I fail now, even if it's very painful, I've got past experiences. So we actually, just like children, we have to teach medical students that there will be times that despite your best intentions or your knowledge, things won't go well. And what do we do about that? And how, when you're competing constantly against each other, do you build a tribe? And do you build connection? And do you ask for help? So in social work, I have to have supervision, you know, once a month. Whether it's good or not, you know, I have to go and do it. You guys don't have that. Just a safe, reflective space to say, what was this like for you? Yeah. And that's a deficit, one that we really need to advocate for change.
Thank you so much, Liz.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Liz.
Sorry.